Well, thank you for the introduction, Pete. What I'm going to be talking about is a project I worked on over the last several years to build a car to complete my San Juan, New Mexico Express. And in this case, this is the second named Durango parlor car. You can see in the photograph here, the prototype is on top. It's the only photograph of the exterior car of that name that I was able to get a hold of, and the bottom photo is the resulting model. Let me talk a little bit about why I was interested in this car. One is I really like parlor cars that have observation platforms, so this fit the bill. Two, I was building my San Juan, New Mexico Express such that it would look good behind either a T12 or a K28 on that. So I wanted to be able to swap engines back and forth and have the train be more or less correct for that. The other reason that I was interested in it is that I like the end railing on this. And so I went on a search for information about this car. It turns out it started life as a Denver Rio Grande built car in 1883. It was an immigrant sleeper, number 106. In 1888, 1889, it was involved in a wreck and a fire and was rebuilt. In 1910, it was rebuilt yet again into a parlor car, and this being coming out as the second named Durango. In 1922, the car body and the platform were lowered. They added extension side bearers for the trucks, and the underframe was reinforced. So from the 1922 vintage up until 1937, when it rolled out as the modernized car named the Gunnison, it was in service as the Durango. So that was the car that I wanted to build. So the information that I put together essentially came from three books that you see on the left. One of them is a set of folio sheets that had that car in it from the appropriate periods of time I was interested in. And the other two books were by Herbert Danneman, and they're Colorado Rail Annuals, number 24 and 25. Number 24 covers the history of passenger service on the Rio Grande and was worth it for identifying when this car would have run, what trains it would have run in, and things of this sort. The annual number 25 is the, if you will, the history and technical specifications of all the cars, and that was a real find there. The other information I needed and used was a drawing by John Maxwell, which is sort of a generic Rio Grande passenger car brake rigging diagram there. And I thought, well, none of the other prototype resources had any of that information in them that I could find. So this was going to take care of how I was going to arrange the brake rigging and air plumbing for that. The other resources was from a friend of mine, and that was Don McKinney. And he's a marvelous builder, and he at one point decided he needed to build some South Pacific Coast passenger cars, and he needed roofs. So we contacted John Busby here in the Bay Area, who had done the vacuum forming for the roofs of the Crossing Gate passenger car line, and they got together and they pulled the roofs that Don needed to build his car. Well, he wrote up that whole process and what you needed to do in the Narrow Gauge Gazette in 1997. So I pulled out that article and read through it and thought, okay, this is something I can probably figure out how to do. The last resource I use is I have a habit of not throwing away kit instructions, but carefully filing them away for future reference. So what you see here are the Crossing Gate kit instructions for their modernized parlor buffet car on that. So what I had is kind of a recipe of how you build one of these things. And more importantly, what I had here in their materials list was a listing of all of the evergreen styrene and sizes, dimensional sizes that I would probably need. So armed with the information out of the two books, I had two photos, and these were both taken in 1936. One of them was looking from the observation platform into the interior of the car on August 21st, 1936. And this is what was in the parlor section of the car. The other picture was the one that was in the title slide, which is the exterior of the left-hand side of the car, looking from the rear to the front. The other thing I had here was a folio sheet from 1904 that just happened to have had been updated to include the Parlor Cars, Alamosa, Durango, and the Silverton on that. And the fourth picture down here was from Dave Grant, which is a wreck of one of the sister cars. I don't recall whether it was the Alamosa or the Silverton, but what was important about this is it shows the outline of the venting and the gas pipe plumbing on the roof for these cars. It turns out these cars had both gas lighting and oil lamp lighting in it. And so that gave me the configuration of how that was done. Another photo from the Dorman collection of the Friends of the Cumbers and Toltec was another wreck picture of one of those sister cars. And what this did was show that, yes, they did have an oval window in the women's toilet. And I thought that was just too neat not to model. Obviously, the rebuild of the Gunnison is that there's just a small square window rather than the fancy oval window. The photos on the bottom are all of the Gunnison, and that was simply because the best photos I could find of the rear platform railing were of the Gunnison, and there were no modifications really made to that railing over the years. So that worked out just fine. So to start one of these projects, I usually end up getting out the T-square drawing board, triangles, and sit down and I basically draw the thing in my case in 1/4" scale, and that's what I did here. What I used for the framing dimensions and things were the dimensions coming from the nominal sizes of evergreen strip styrene and their sheet material thicknesses, etc. Laying out the car sides, as I had decided I was going to be using, the Grant Line parlor car windows and the Hall Scott oval windows. So those were drawn in to basically fit the castings that I had from Grant Line. The other drawing I did is in the upper left-hand corner, and this was the layout of the tail end of the car because that was going to have to be completely fabricated. There just weren't any castings or anything I was able to see that looked like they were going to help me with that end of the car. So with that, we were pretty much set. I also knew I needed to move to change the railing layout on the end beam on the observation platform, and so the photo on the lower left-hand corner that shows a standard Grant Line cast railing plus their end beam. The rest of it just has dimensions of holes I was going to need to plug, new holes I was going to need for the spacing of the end railing to match what was needed for that fancy platform, etc. And then on the right is simply something I do, which is I keep a lot of notes during a build, including the history of the car and a list of all of the photographs and what books they came out of. So we got started with the underframe, and the upper left-hand photo basically shows all of the car body stringers, if you will, laid out. Part of the decking applied on the floor side of it, and the undersheathing on the bottom of the car. So do you really need all those stringers in there? Well, the answer is probably not, because it all gets covered up with this stuff anyway, but I included them anyhow just to add some strength to the car. Above the car body frame there, you can see some other bits and pieces, and those basically are to finish the sheathing, and the other pieces and the small pieces basically will build the extensions for the end platforms. And you can see the extension for the end platform on one of the ends of the car here in the lower photograph. At this point, those parts had been put together. I added some other items that were common on the car construction. At this point, I've mounted the body bolster drilled and tapped for test fitting trucks, and also the KD coupler box that I used on these cars. The other thing I did, as long as this was nice and flat, is I basically, to the underside of the card, added all of the cross beams and boards that supported the queen posts and the air brake equipment. So one thing I'd like to point out here was the shark fin that you see in the bottom photo on the left. And what that is it's invisible when the car is finished and on the layout. But what it does is it basically prevents the trucks from rotating 360 degrees when you pick up the car off the layout and turn it over to correct something or do some maintenance. Okay, once we had the body done, we basically used again T-square and drawing board to lay out the car sides on evergreen car siding here. And so what you can see is I got started on that in the upper left and photo, and I've cut out a number of windows to fit the Grant Line castings. And I do that by after drawing the window opening dimensions that I needed on the styrene, as I then drill a small hole in the corner of each of the openings, and then very tediously with a razor blade and a steel straight edge is cut those out until I can snap the little block out, and then the window is basically trimmed up to fit the Grant Line casting with a file. And on the upper right hand corner, you can basically see I've completed the bottom or one car side, and I've applied the belt rail, and I've got all the Grant Line windows now glued in place, and I'm ready to start the same tedious process on the other side of the car, including that cutout for the oval window, which was essentially done by drilling out most of it, and then very carefully using small oval files to file the shape and to fit again of the Grant Line casting. The two lower photos basically show the car ends. The head end of the car, that was basically built up using yet another Grant Line casting that included the door, the roof arch, and things of this sort. And so that along with the Grant Line castings of the passenger car corner posts and more evergreen styrene, is that fabricated up real well. The inside of that, of course, is covered with more sheet styrene that was cut and filed to fit that the built-up exterior portion of it, and will allow me to do an interior car finish. The opposite end of the car on the observation platform, that was built up entirely by layering up evergreen sheet styrene and applying strip styrene to it in order to get the two large windows on either side of the door. I didn't have dimensions for these. I just guessed at those from looking at the photographs of the Gunnison, because again, they did not alter that into the car, and also what I could see from the reflection in the photos in the Colorado Railroad Museum book. The interior partitions were actually pretty easy. Again, these were fabricated out of evergreen styrene and Grant Line passenger car corner posts, and they were just built according to the dimensions that were on the folio sheet. And when I did the car interior siding and things, that was all inserted with gaps in between, so the walls that butted up against the car side here, they just slide right in between the gaps in the interior sheathing or whatever, and that makes a real nice tight fit, and gave me a positive location of this thing is removed and reinserted several times during the build. The car needed a modicum of an interior, I decided. So again, the details that are in here were basically shown in the folio sheets, and that includes those quarter round water tanks, the location of the sink by the water tank. And so I just fabricated again those up out of styrene tubing and bits and scraps of styrene, and put that together, because nobody was really going to see down below these things in the car once it was built. As I took some liberties with some bracing and things of this sort that you see that stiffens up the smoking room in the center and also supports the water can in the sink in the men's toilet on the right. Again, that all becomes invisible once the seats in the smoking section goes in and the rest of this thing gets snapped into the car. Now we were up to the part of the project that I dreaded, and that was doing the roof. So I decided to attack this sort of like the roofs in the crossing gate, which was to build up the clear story sections first. And for this, as I used a bunch of Grant line castings, and I had to slice and dice those and glue them together with pieces of evergreen styrene interspaced in there in order to get the proper number of clear story windows and the appropriate spacing for them that I could see in the photographs of the car, how those were deployed down the side of the car. The standard overlapping windows just that come in the Grant line kits for these things just would not have been appropriate for this car. In the middle photograph that you can see that I've now built up a frame. That frame fits inside the top of the car body as above, and I have added the side strips and the clear story strips in there, and they're basically supported and held in place by some bulkheads, and the bulkheads are at either end of the car, and they're at the major partition for the smoking compartment and women's toilet in the car. And so that gave a little bit of rigidity and things of this sort. In the bottom photo, you can just see how all that slip fits into the car and sits there, and that'll be important later on. You do not want to glue this assembly into the car. So now we were up to is I needed to form the roof parts, so we had to build a vacuum form box, and that was just made out of some wood that I had sitting around here. In this case, it was press board. You can see the one end has a hole drilled in it that fits my the hose end of my vacuum cleaner, and the board on top has holes in it there. I had to add more holes later, but that ends up being the plate that the forms sit on when you're drawing the vacuum and drawing the hot styrene down over the formers. So I made a fixture or a tool out of a piece of 3/4 inch plywood by cutting the radius of what that arc was going to be in it, and then gluing 80 grit belt sander paper inside of that cutout arc. And then the roof itself, the formers were made out of straight basswood, and I had drawn on the basswood marks on the ends and along the side of it, so I could basically sand for a while by drawing it in one direction through this, checking the lines I'd drawn on the basswood to see how close I was coming, etc. And so it was just a tedious process, and periodically brushing all of the sawdust that had been trapped in the sandpaper out so I could get a good cut again. And we just did this. This was done with both the clear story roof and also the lower roof section. The ends were just simply formed using files and sandpaper until I got the curve over that I thought looked good on both of the ends. So the photo you see in the lower right basically shows both of the finished patterns sitting in place on the vacuum form box. The vacuum forming, that was a trial and error process, and I did not have success the first couple of times out. Now, this was during COVID, and I had a limited supply of styrene on hand, so I couldn't have too many failures before I got a hit. So after 2 failures, I was down to my last sheet, and so I wasn't going to do a repeat. What I observed is the aluminum angle that I had used to build the first frame that fit down over the vacuum form box from and clamp the styrene in place tended to warp as it was being heated up in the oven. It basically expanded, starting letting go, and you can see, where the styrene is sagged away from the frame in the upper photo, upper left-hand photo. Is you can't pull a vacuum through that. And I also concluded I didn't have enough clamps around the perimeter to hold it tight regardless. So I spent more money buying some much heavier and larger aluminum angle and built a brand new frame to go over the top of the box. And that ended up with a successful pull on the first try. So that was it. I'd had the heavier angle. I'd added more clamps around the end of it, put the sheet in the oven, heated it up until it looked like it was just barely starting to sag, flopped that on the box and fired up the vacuum cleaner. And what you see is the one shot that was made from that. That's both the photo in the upper right hand corner, and then the photo with the sheet after it was removed from the frame. So we had success. The The two roof pieces I needed were then cut out by flipping that over, leaving the forms in, and then taking a very long, thin knife and very carefully scribing down between the form and the side of the styrene to cut the lengthwise loose on both patterns, and then I could do the same thing on the ends with the two end patterns, and this drop those two pieces out. In the case of the lower roof section, is I did need to cut out the center portion of that because it just simply wasn't going to be needed, and I didn't want to um, block the view from the clear story down into the car. So that was it. So you ended up with three roof pieces: a left side, a right side, and then the clear story piece. So the upper photo here basically says, yeah, we're putting this together. So what you see is that frame with the clear story window section in it, and you see that at this point here, I have glued on the left and right roof sides as well as the clear story roof side. At this point, it looks a little crude, but this is where all styrene patching and filing and putting and everything basically comes in to clean that all up. I will also note at this time here is if you look at the upper photo, you're going to see the letter boards are already applied to the car. And this was done using spacers that were the exact same thickness of the car body itself. And so by gluing the letter boards on the underside of the car, what I had here is, if you will, was sort of a snap fit over the top of the car to hold the roof in place. So I didn't need to have any screws or anything else like that. It just slip fits into place and snuggles right down, and the letter boards go down against the tops of the window castings, and that just was worked out great. I've done that on several cars. Yeah, the other photos just basically show some of the cutting of small bits and pieces and filing the shape that's needed in order to fill in the blanks and other things that invariably show up. And then if I really had big gaps, I would try and fill those in with body putty and again file the shape. You can see in the center bottom picture, the one on the bottom is, as I've added some extensions to the sideboard so I could get the droop that I thought that appeared in the car photos on that. And once that, the solvent had bonded the two pieces of styrene together, I just used round and oval files, if you will, to basically file that droop section into the end of the car. And the last photo on the right just shows a the roof sheathing being applied to the exterior of the car, clamped in place with a solvent bonded, and then from that another trim piece was put on the end, and that finishes it up. And at this point, this is what you've got for a car, and in my case, it was so far so good, which was all the encouragement I needed to keep going. So at this point, with those large windows, I knew we were going to need some interior details. And given that most of the car was the parlor section, it was really important that those 16 swivel seats in there be appropriate. I thought about 3D, but I don't know CAD, and I figured it would take me longer to learn CAD than it would be to figure out how to fabricate these things. And because you're going to be looking at them through the exterior of the car window, is they didn't need to be spot on, they only needed to be close. So I decided I could break this thing up into sections that I could basically fabricate up out of styrene. So there was going to be a styrene section for the chair back, a styrene section for the seat cushion, stacked pieces of styrene in order to get the fluted metal frame look around the bottom, armrests kind of filed out of styrene there, and then a couple of arm supports also filed out of styrene. The upper photo on the photo basically in the slide here shows the fixture I soldered up out of brass just in order to get the chair back profile up there. So I could slide the appropriate piece of styrene in there, scribe around those points, and then carefully cut that and file the suit. Kind of see the sequence from the scribing fixture to scribe lines on a chunk of styrene to the seat finally file the shape. And the same thing for the chair arm supports is the pieces of styrene, and the second photo in the middle there basically shows kind of sequence of filing up that to get something that looked a little bit fancy, kind of like the what I thought I saw in the photos of the interior of the car, and do that. And the big bottom photo just shows all of the parts laid out and kind of the sequence of assembly. The pedestals were turned up using a Unimat lathe and just a piece of old aluminum wind chime rod that I had lying around. That if I ruined that, I really didn't care because I didn't spend any money on it. So so what this was it. And then while I was at it, I also fabricated the two what were called couches on the folio sheets that were inside the smoker room. So if somebody looked in there, this would give them the two couches to look at. Um, Once I had that done, I thought, well, I can go to work on the bottom of the interior. And so for that, the roof was removed and the car body was just supported on a couple of blocks of wood, so it was stable. And I put together the underbody out of brass. I wanted to work in brass to try and revive some soldering skills that I hadn't used for a long time. And so this project provided that. Um, the needle beams and the queen posts are things that you actually buy as brass castings from Wiseman if you needed to. But I thought, well, it'll be interesting for me to see if I can fabricate these things because I wanted to try and figure out how could I slit real fine diameter tube down the middle. And the other thing I was wondering is how can I slice off really small rings of small diameter brass tubing? So that led me to machining up out of some scrap brass that I had around here the device you see in the lower left-hand corner that's clamped into a pan of ice here, and where you see the slit running down between them, there's a hole in there that is the diameter of the tubing I was interested in, and so with that slit and a piece of tubing inserted in there, and this fixture screwed back together, is that allowed me to get a pretty good zona saw cut with fine teeth down the center of the tube, which is what I needed to make the ends of the queen posts. Then as far as slicing off all of the little discs and things that were needed for other parts of the queen posts and for the base of the railing on the observation platform, you can see that it was just more holes drilled to size here along the center line of the split between the two blocks. And again, the fixture there just clamped the tubes in place, and then I could just use a zona saw to slice those off. When I did that, I also inserted brass wire in the tube before I started sawing. This did a couple of things. It kept things kind of stable, and two, it gave something for the sliced off piece to hang on to rather than dropping on the workbench and rolling onto the floor, never to be found again. So that's what we did there. The rest of the brake rigging was just done up from bending up strip styrene and soldering things in place, and the other castings, the brake cylinder reservoir, the triple valve, et cetera, the pair separator. These were all precision scale castings or castings available from Keith Weissman out of the old back shop line. And I think the clevises, there's a number of clevises available as brass castings, and these were from the appearance were some that I had on hand that Grant Line used to offer. Okay, so we're kind of back to lighting on this and the roof now that we kind of have the underbody taken care of and seating for the interior of the car. What was on the roof? Well, on the roof on the left end is what you can see, and the lower is the water reservoir and things for the Baker heater that was in a closet at that end of the car, along with the exhaust stack coming up from the Baker heater and some other kind of a fill hatch. And I'm not sure how all that worked, but I did take this from the photograph of the one picture of the car I saw, and also finding some information on Baker heaters and an old car builder's encyclopedia. The other thing is using the photograph of the sister wrecked car is I can then use Grant Line vents on the roof, and I arrange those to match what I saw vents on the top of the wrecked car. Where you have the single vents running down the center, those are pinch gas lights, and what you can see running in the area of each of those is the pinch gas line that ran along the top of the car, and I'm not sure where that pinch gas bottle was hidden, but from the car it looked like it ducked down in down at one end of the car there, so it was somewhere maybe around the Baker heater. I don't know. Where you see the two vents in tandem there, those were the gas lamps or the oil lamps rather. And I was fortunate that I still had two of the old Grant Line oil lamp kits on hand, and was left to figuring out how to fabricate the pinch gas lamps. Which after looking at a couple of photos, I said, okay, I think they probably look like this. So I just got some lucite rod, and again using the Unimat, turned up those bodies that you see in the left center there. They're pretty crude. Then I basically had drilled those for the bodies in order to insert the legs that suspended them from the ceiling. And the lower left-hand corner, you can kind of see a little bending jig I made up to bend up the things that suspended the lamp body from the ceiling, yeah, uniformly, and then you can kind of see the assembly process there. The black piece is actually an assembly item from the Grant Line oil lamps. It came in real handy. I just thought that would be the easy way to do this, so I basically built everything to fit that. And then you can kind of see one of the completed gizmos on the right hand of that lower left hand picture. So that's my pinch gas light. The lower right-hand picture is the two gas lamps and the pinch gas lights after I've hand painted them with silver paint in the appropriate places. Okay, now we're to another tedious part of the project, which is what I call mask paint, mask paint, mask paint, until you're finally done. In this case, I had painted the inside of the roof white, and then I had masked off everything that wasn't going to be a wood part, so as to preserve the white, and then I spray painted what was called mahogany by the manufacturer of that particular paint. And I did the same thing in the body, except before I masked and painted the mahogany, is I basically painted the floor. I used an oak or a pine here, because looking at the one photograph, it looked like it was a raw wood floor. It did not have carpeting on it. The Gunnison ended up with carpeting. It could be that this car had carpeting too, and I misinterpreted the photo. But I decided for my purposes I was just gonna have a wood plank floor in there. So once the floor was painted and dry, then I could mask off the floor and paint the inside of the car mahogany. And while I was at that, I also painted the partition mahogany. And then the details and things were later painted by hand on those sections. So at this point, again, it was more masking of the car and more masking of the clear story that allowed me to basically put on the exterior body coat, if you will. And here you can see that both the clear story and the car body have had all of the masking and stuffing and wadding and everything else removed from them. And what we're left with is a painted car parts. There's still touch up needed to be done, etc., but we're well on our way here. For painting the chairs, is trying to hold on to those would be tedious, so I've used evergreen styrene and just fabricated up a fixture that I could slide the base of the pedestals into, and that basically clamped all these chairs into place. And then it was just a matter of getting, in this case, I think it was a rattle can of appropriate color that testers had, and I painted the chairs with those. When those were done, as I just left them in the fixtures, stripped the masking tape off of around the pedestals, and then brush painted the metal parts of the chair using again the silver paint, which would be the chair arms and the chair base. I used white decal paper to make the anti-macassars on the backs of the chairs, and I decided I had to have those because they showed up prominently in photos of the car taken from the exterior, and in particular the photo taken of the interior down the length of the car. At this point, it was the tedious process of cutting a lot of slipcover glass and putting all the glass in the car and in the clear story. I like using the slipcover glass on passenger cars and locomotives just because I look neat. Any other kind of a structure or whatever it is I cheat and I use 5 thousandths clear styrene, and that works fine, but it just has a slightly different appearance than the slipcover glass does. What I do for these cutting projects, I do make up a styrene fixture that basically holds a full sheet of glass, and this is set such that the thickness of the things on there is just about the same thickness of the glass itself. And I cut all of these things and put them on using a thin beam square, so everything is square. That allows me to then use that same square and carefully mark off the cutting distances for the different size pieces of glass I need, and then use a diamond tip scriber to scribe once, carefully lift the thing out of there with a pair of tweezers, put it over another small piece of styrene, and just take the scrap end of the styrene and just or not styrene, but the glass, just lightly tap it, and you get a clean snap and break. Of course, you're going to break several sheets of this glass getting in the hang of it, but once you do, it goes pretty well. The bad news is you seem to have to relearn that talent every time you sit down to make glass windows. So this for me was no excuse. I ended up with a pile of unusable glass, and finally got to the point where I was able to get usable glass out of it. And so once we had that, that was we were in. The car was decaled before I put in the glass, because that then allowed me to mask everything again and then overspray it with a glass coat. The rear end railing, that was something I got going early on. I figured, well, if I could draw up the all of the pieces needed for the end railing, which are shown here, and these were scaled from the photographs and things of this sort. I could probably do those, and I hope to be able to find an outfit that would etch these in brass for me. I did. The Silicon Valley, of course, has such firms that do that. But the problem is these guys work for the big guys and the big commercial guys, and they can do really fine work. But it was also going to be about the price of a new brass locomotive, and I decided that was way more money than I wanted to put into these railings. A friend of mine, Mike Musel, who's a tremendous modeler in his own right, said, "Well, you know, Dave, I could mill these out of 15 thousandths clear acrylic sheet if you would like." So my answer was, "You bet." So Mike took my Dave draw that I had done thinking things were going to be etched, and he transformed those into CAD that he could then derive the tool paths from the CNC mill. And what he delivered to me is shown in the upper right hand corner, which was little bitty pieces, epoxy or masking tape to a piece of cardstock, and this is what the end railing was. The centerpiece, it shows I've added strip styrene to the top sides of these things in order to bulk out the brass rail that was at the top, and on the right hand is just simply an assembly fixture that I built to help me guide things into place while I glued these things to various various brass posts and in an end beam. The lower right-hand photo just again shows some parts fabricated up out of castings and brass wire that constituted the backup whistle on the thing in the air dump valve for the conductor to dump the air in the train should he need to. So at that point is once that was the rear end platform was installed on the cars, we were pretty much finished, and this is what the result was. And there's the interior up there looking from both directions with the railing on the tail end and the brake lever on the tail end, and the two ends of the car. So that worked out well. And here's the left and right sides of the car on that. And again, you can, you know, the work on the chairs did pay off, because you can certainly see those through the windows, and you can see them through the windows, and the train is running down the pike. So we're set there, and that's it. Thanks for your interest, and I finally got what I was looking for, which was an appropriate car to bring up the tail end of the San Juan, New Mexico Express. Thanks for paying attention.